And welcome to the May 2023 Ordinary Council meeting. We acknowledge and pay our respects to the traditional custodians of this land, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation and their elders past and present. I would like to advise everyone that the audio of this meeting is being live streamed to YouTube. I request everyone to please turn off their mobile phones. I remind you that any recording of the meeting proceedings and photography within the chamber is prohibited unless prior approval has been granted, and councillors and city officers are reminded to disclose any declarations of financial interests and interests affecting impartiality and are requested to activate their microphones when addressing the meeting. So, with that, welcome. Item 1 is the declaration of opening, and I declare this meeting open at 1 minute past 6 p.m. Councillor Glenn Cridland has requested to attend tonight's meeting via telephone. So in accordance with Regulation 14C and 14C of the Local Government Administration Regulations 1996, I've authorised Councillor Cridland to attend the meeting by electronic means. Councillor Cridland, in accordance with Regulation 14C subsection 5 of the Local Government Administration Regulations 1996, can you maintain confidentiality during the meeting and when the meeting goes behind closed doors?
I'm not sure I can when it goes behind closed doors because of my situation up here in the northwest of WA. It probably is best that I don't participate during that part of the meeting.
Governance, does that mean that Councillor Cridland can participate in the open portion of the meeting but not the closed portion of the meeting?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you, Ms Fry, and thank you, Ms Cridland. Item 2 is a disclaimer. The City of South Perth disclaims any liability for any loss arising from any person or body relying on any statement, discussion, recommendation or decision made during this meeting. Item 3 is announcements from the presiding member. That's me. There is no such announcements this evening. Item 4 is attendances. Item 4.1 is apologies. We've not received any apologies for this meeting. Item 4.2 is approved leaves of absence. And whilst Councillor Glenn Cridland does have an approved leave of absence for the period of 20 May 2023 to 31 May 2023 inclusive, he is here with us tonight by electronic means. Item 5 is declarations of interest. We've got 2 so far. So CEO Mike Bradford has declared an impartiality interest in item 10.5.1 as this item relates to my contract of employment, and I've declared an impartiality interest in item 15.1.3 as I participated in discussions relating to this matter. Councillors, does anyone else have any interest that they wish to declare this evening? Councillor Choi.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, I'd like to declare an impartiality interest for items 15.1.1, 15.1.2 and 15.1.3, as all parties are known to me.
Thank you, Councillor Choi. Councillors, are there? Councillor Manolis.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I would also like to declare an impartiality at 15.1.1, 15.1.2 and 15.1.3 as some of the matters or the people are known to me and I'm involved in one of the complaints.
Thank you, Councillor Manolis. Councillors, is there anyone else who wishes to declare a declaration of interest this evening? Councillor Navard.
Gone through that before, and I was just wondering, is it wise for us all to declare such interest?
Should I send that your way, Ms Fry?
When it comes to disclosing interests, it's up to each individual councillor to make that decision.
Given that, I'll declare an interest just to be cautious.
All right.
And that would be all of the items at 15.
So is that 15.1.1, 15.1.2 and 15.1.3?
So.
And is that an impartiality interest?
Yes, it would be.
And on what basis is the impartiality interest made?
Oh, because all of these people are known to me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillors, is there anyone else who wishes to declare a declaration of interest this evening? Councillor Warland?
Thank you, Mayor. On item 15.1.3, I believe, an impartiality interest as it very indirectly relates to some of things I've been involved in over the past few months.
All right. Was that 15.1.2 or 15.1.3?
Trying to find it in the agenda here, sorry, just bear with me. It's no, I believe it is 15.1.3. Yep.
All right. Have we got that governance? Councillors, does anyone else wish to declare any? Councillor Nevada, see your lights on there? Oh, no, wasn't meant to be. Councillor Credland, is there any declarations that you'd wish to make this evening?
Nothing from me, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right. Councillors, anyone else? No. Okay. All right. Moving on to item 6, which is public question time. Item 6.1 is responses to previous public questions taken on notice. That's nil for this evening. Item 6.2 is public question time. So I now open public question time at 6 minutes past 6 p.m. We have received 3 written submissions prior to tonight's meeting. And with that, I would like to invite Mr. Barry Drake of South Perth. If you'd like to come to the microphone, welcome, and we look forward to your questions.
My name's Barry Drake. I live at Unit 3, Number 2, Senior Crescent, South Perth. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, councillors, officers, members of the gallery. My questions this month relate to the network charge for the underground power, the same as they did last month and the month before. And just before I get on to these questions, last month I mentioned, or I said, that Jeff...
Mr. Drake, I'm sorry to interrupt, but public questions are for just that.
Mr. Mayor, I want to correct something that I said last
Please
month that was incorrect.
In that case, please proceed.
Okay. I said that Jeff Baker was the federal member for Swan. What I should have said is that Jeff Baker was with the federal member for Swan when he had his corner, street corner meeting down on the Sir James Mitchell Park and invited landowners to go there and ask questions, which I did. He was with Zenata Mascarenas, who's the minister for the member for Swan, when he said, after I mentioned about what the city had charged me for the underground power...
I think you've corrected the record there, Mr. Drake.
There was one other thing,
Mr. Drake,
Mayor.
please proceed to your question.
He said he agreed that it was price gouging. And
Mr. Drake, last chance. I'm going to ask you to leave if you do not obey the rules and simply ask your question. I mean this.
Mr. Mayor, I don't interrupt you when you're...
That's it. Mr. Drake, please leave the meeting. The meeting is adjourned until Mr. Drake leaves the chamber. to everyone for that adjournment there. Just a gentle reminder that public question time really is just for public questions. It's not to argue the toss, it's not to debate. It really is just for public questions. So, with that, I'd like to invite Mr. Trevor Hill of South Perth, if you'd like to come to the microphone. Welcome, and we look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If I wasn't nervous, I bloody am now. So my name's Trevor Hill. I live at 100A Forest Street, South Perth. I'm actually representing nobody today, just myself. So my questions are about item 10.1.1, Recreation Aquatic Facility. So, and a bit of preamble just to give you a bit of an idea where I'm coming from. Given that at number 3 of the Office's recommendation at item 10.1.1 in tonight's agenda, requests that the Chief Executive Officer not to progress delivery of the RAF project, and that number 4 of that recommendation notes that the Chief Executive Officer will continue to engage with the federal government with a view to retaining the $20 million federal grant and be directed towards the projects that will benefit the community of the City of South Perth. With that in mind, I have the following questions. If Council vote to accept the Officer's recommendation at that item 10.1.1 on tonight's agenda, what or is the estimated time frame for the closure of the RAF project?
Thank you for your question. Ms. Amprema?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. To close out the RAF project, there are several minor administrative tasks to be completed, plus the formal resolution of the funding agreement with the federal government. The city is unable to provide an exact time frame. However, the resources used will be internal officer time only.
Thank you. Question 2. If Council vote to accept the Officer's recommendation at item 10.1.1, and given that I note that in April, the Patch Group have invoiced the City for a further $7,185.20, bringing the total payments to the Patch Group for services for RAF works since December 2020 to $181,922.20 by my reckoning and going back through the books. Is there an estimation of what further costs will be incurred to finalise the RAF project?
Thank you. Ms. Amprema?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I refer to my previous answer in that any costs incurred to finalise the RAF project, should the officer recommendation be supported by council, will relate only to internal staffing costs.
Okay, thanks. Question 3, given that officers are also recommending that the CEO request the retention of the federal grant of $20 million for other projects and that the request is successful, will the upgrade of the George Burnett Leisure Centre be considered as part of that business plan?
Thank you. Ms. Amprema?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. The city has not yet commenced discussions with the Commonwealth. At this stage of the process, it's not possible to say what projects, if any, would get the support of the federal government.
Thank you, Ms. Amprema, and thank you, Mr. Hill, for your questions.
Thank you, and thank you very much for going through all this whole drama so far. Good luck, guys.
Thank you. I'd now like to invite Ms. Joanne Ord of Como, if you'd like to come to the microphone. Welcome, and we look forward to your questions.
Evening, everybody. I think from listening to those previous questions, there might be a bit of crossover, so just bear with me. So a bit of preamble. At the 30 March special meeting, the City recommended the CEO approach the federal government with the aim of retaining the $5.5 million that's already received and held in reserve. And at the 16th of May agenda meeting, the City has now requested the CEO to continue to engage with the federal government with a view to retaining the entire $20 million federal grant, noting that further correspondence to the government is required by the 31st of March if the City wishes to vary the current agreement. So question 1, on what basis has the City arrived at the conclusion that retention of the full federal grant is possible?
Thank you. Ms. Amprema?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The City has not concluded that retention of the federal grant is possible. However, given the large amount of money involved, the City is keen to retain the money for projects that would benefit the community of South Perth, and thus is notifying Council and the community that it intends to do this.
Okay. Has the City established a schedule or realistic timeframe within which it would be reasonable to ascertain whether retention of the full grant is likely or whether the City's focus should return to trying to retain the $5.5 million already in reserve?
Thank you. Ms. Amprema?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. As part of the city's ongoing discussions with the federal government, the city's been requested to notify the federal government of its intentions regarding the revised federal funding agreement no later than the 31st of May 2023. The city is unable to predict how long it will take for the federal government to respond.
Thank you, Ms Amprimo. And your final question, Ms Ord?
I am aware you answered a previous question about costs, but I'll ask this anyway. Will the city be tracking its costs incurred and making public those costs while attempts to retain any or all of the federal funding are made so that residents are informed of progress versus costs?
Thank you. Ms Amprimo?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The costs anticipated to be associated with discussions between the federal government and the city are expected to be minimal as they relate to time of members of the senior executive. As such, these costs are not identified separately.
Thank you very much, Ms Amprimo, and thank you, Ms Ord, for your questions. We now move on to, before I do that, I should check if there's any late questions in the tray. No, there's not? Okay. In that case, I close public question time at 6:25 p.m. Item 7 is confirmation of minutes and notes. Item 7.1 is minutes. Item 7.1.1 is the ordinary council meeting held on 18 April 2023. So I'm about to call for a mover and then a seconder that the minutes of the ordinary council meeting held 18 April 2023 be taken as read and confirmed as a true and correct record. Could I have a mover, please? Councillor Brenda Abranis, thank you. Councillor Manolis seconding. Councillors, please cast your votes. And Councillor Cridland, how would you like to vote on that one?
I vote yes.
Thank you. I'm just waiting on one more vote. Governance, we're still waiting on one councillor. Oh, it was me. There we go. Well, that was unanimous. Thank you all. I'm sorry to keep you waiting. Moving on to item 7.2, it's notes of briefing. So I'm going to call for someone to move that council notes the following council briefings and workshops were held. That's 7.2.1, concept briefings and workshops, and 7.2.2, council agenda briefing, 16 May 2023. Could I have a mover for that, please? Councillor Brenda Abranis, thank you. Councillor Manolis seconding. Councillors, please cast your votes. Councillor Cridland, how would you like to vote on that one?
I vote yes.
Thank you. And that was unanimous again. Thank you, councillors. That brings us to item 8, which is presentations. Item 8.1 is petitions, of which there's nil this evening. Item 8.2 is gifts or awards presented to council. That's nil this evening. And item 8.3 is deputations, and deputations were heard at the council agenda briefing held 16 May 2023. That brings us to item 9, which is method of dealing with agenda business. I wish to advise that the following agenda items are new reports and were not presented to the council agenda briefing held 16 May 2023. These items are item 10.5.1, Chief Executive Officer Key Performance Indicator Report. Item 15.1.1, Councillor Code of Conduct, Matter 1. Item 15.1.2, Councillor Code of Conduct, Matter 2. Item 15.1.3, Councillor Code of Conduct, Matter 3. So I'll now seek confirmation from the Chief Executive Officer, Mr Mike Bradford, that all the report items contained in tonight's agenda, with the exception of those listed, were discussed at the May Council agenda briefing. Mr Bradford.
That is correct, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. So, with the exception of those items to be withdrawn for discussion, reports will be adopted by exception resolution. And by this, I mean the officer recommendation will be adopted as is, without discussion or amendment. The following items have been withdrawn so far. Those items are item 10.3.2, Tender 3 of 2023, supply, installation and maintenance of bus shelters with advertising space. The reason for that is Councillor Stephen Russell has an alternative motion. And item 10.5.1, Chief Executive Officer Key Performance Indicator Report. The reason for that is it is a new report. Councillors, item 10.1.1, recreation and aquatic facility, and item 10.3.3, proposed cafe restaurant addition to multiple dwellings, lot 174, number 60 Elizabeth Street, South Perth, were the subject of deputations last week. Does anyone wish to withdraw these or any other items for discussion this evening? I think Councillor Choi was first there.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to withdraw both items 10.1.1 and 10.3.3, please.
All right, so we are also withdrawing item 10.1.1, that's recreation and aquatic facility, and item 10.3.3, proposed cafe restaurant addition to multiple dwellings, lot 174, number 60 Elizabeth Street, South Perth. Councillor Russell, I saw your hand go. No? Okay. Anyone else? That's a no. All right. So bear with me while I adjust my notes. Oh, I should ask, Councillor Cridland, were there any items that you wish to withdraw this evening?
No additional items, Mr Mayor. Thank you.
All right. Okay. So I'm now going to call for a mover and seconder to carry the following items by exception resolution. Those items are as follows. 10.1.2, City of South Perth Community Safety and Crime Prevention Plan 2022 to 2027. Item 10.3.1, Tender 2 of 2023, provision of pump and bore maintenance services. Item 10.4.1, listing of payments April 2023. Item 10.4.2, monthly financial statements April 2023. And item 10.4.3, correspondence between the Department of Local Government, Sport and Cultural Industries and City of South Perth. Councillors, can I have a mover for those items, please? Councillor Warland, thank you. Someone to second? Councillor Brenda Brandis, thank you. Councillors, please cast your votes. And Councillor Cridland, how would you like to vote on that one?
I vote in the affirmative.
Thank you. So that was unanimous. Those items have just been passed by exception resolution in accordance with clause 5.5 of the City of South Perth Standing Orders Local Law 2007, and the officer's recommendations have been accepted by council. We'll now be moving on to those items those items identified to be withdrawn for discussion. The first of which is item 10.1.1, recreation and aquatic facility. We do have an officer recommendation before us this evening. Does anyone wish to move the officer recommendation? Councillor Choi, and anyone to second? Councillor Navard, Councillor Choi, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Now, I decided to withdraw this item rather than letting it go through en bloc because I believe this has been such a significant project for the community, spanning many years now, that I believe it's in the public interest that councillors be able to speak to this item if they so wish to tonight, or as the saying goes, forever hold your peace. So I'm not sure about, and I'm happy to start. So I'm not sure about anyone else, but I, for one, am embarrassed by the Honourable Minister's latest response to this council and the city. I acknowledge the Minister's sentiments and tone following Council's recent apparent demand on the state, the Minister's words, not mine. It is also noted that the sentiment has been published in the local news and circulated throughout the community. This council has often heard and raised itself the risks of reputational damage to this council and the city in certain decision making with the RAF project. Well, it is the view that council, as well as the community, should reflect now on the actual words spoken, not conjecture, as plainly stated in the Honourable Minister's letter in terms of councillors' alleged demand. I expressed a concern about such a response at the March meeting, as I considered the previous response council received from the Minister to be quite comprehensive, and it was the view that it ought to have been sufficient for council's purposes in deliberating on the RAF and arriving to where we're still at now. It is not clear what the CEO's response to Minister Templeman's latest letter will be, if any, and even though not being Mayor Milner, Councillor Warland, Councillor Cridland or Councillor De Souza, if I bumped into Minister Templeman tomorrow, I think I would actually be minded to apologise on my own behalf for any impression of demanding behaviour that may have been inadvertently or not construed from Council's recent actions. I also empathise with the City Administration, in particular their time and energy and the position I feel, in my opinion, that they have placed in with respect to this item. As stated previously, I respect their reporting candour on this item, and I encourage councillors to demonstrate the same respect and this time support and vote affirmatively for the officer recommendation, and not expend any more ratepayers' money into kicking the can down the road further and attempt to progress a project that is clearly financially unfeasible. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Choi. Councillor Navard, you're the seconder. Is there anything you wish to say?
Just briefly, just to add a little bit and put the matter in context. The 3 projects that were funded through this system in the metropolitan area have all reached the same conclusion, so that we are not, City of South Perth, in isolation, and how these funded projects have unfurled. Each of the other 2 projects were stuck with identified funds of about $40 million as well, and have found that they, at this point, have no direction to go. So I think that sort of playing blame games was probably quite inappropriate, given that each of those projects experienced the same difficulties. That's it.
Thank you, Councillor Navard. Councillors, is there anyone who wishes to speak against the officer recommendation? Councillor Warland?
Thank you, Mayor. And I will tonight direct my comments more towards those in our community who, to their great credit, have put in a sustained effort, particularly in recent years, to rally the troops and make the RAF a reality. I suspect that there will be many people tonight who may be disappointed with the outcome that we, I suspect, will reach. There may be people who feel deeply frustrated and perhaps disillusioned with the process of a 4-year journey to get to this point. And if such feelings are there, then I sympathise with them. But I particularly want to thank those people, because what they demonstrated is that when people engage and show up, they can actually shape this process. And that's been a really important lesson, I think, of the many lessons throughout this journey, that when our community does pull together, that we can actually make an impact, even if in the end the desired result is perhaps not what we were hoping for. We know, of course, there are many people in our community who have supported and dreamed of this project, not just for years, but in some cases for decades. We've had people tell us that incidentally. And I think that just emphasises the importance of the work that those people put in. And I won't name them because there's always a risk when you name people individually that you will miss some people out. But those people know who they are, who really did roll up their sleeves for the RAF, particularly in the past year or so. And that really culminated in, a fairly substantial demonstration in our community support for this project, in recognition of the need, the identified need for particularly the aquatic element of it. And that obviously, as we know, was seen in not just the petition, but also in multiple deputations that were made to this chamber, many questions, many discussions, and that was done through a lot of hard work. I know there was a lot of people knocking on doors, collecting signatures, speaking to their neighbours, speaking to their friends, outlining why this ultimately was a good thing for our community. They took action when it was required, and for that, they deserve enormous credit. I do just want to touch briefly on, I guess, where to from here. The Minister's letter has been brought up tonight. I was going to raise it myself. I think it was right to formally update the state government on the updated figures we had. We had before them a request for funding, which was based on figures that were at that point in time approximately 18 months out of date. Therefore, in a formal and courteous sense, it was absolutely the right thing to do to update the Minister and Mr Baker, who I acknowledge is here tonight, on those updated figures to assist them in making a decision. And I'm not entirely sure that I think all the characterisation of that letter or response has been accurate. It is curious, I think, that after nearly 18 months, I think 2 ministers, but certainly 2 mid-year reviews and 2 state budgets, that the state government apparently deems that insufficient to make a decisive call. But I do take some hope from Minister Templeman's letter, where he talks about, again, and reiterates that a final decision somehow has not been made on this item. And in that sense, I think there has been a change of wind slightly. It would appear to me that there has perhaps been some groundwork that we are not necessarily privy to between various levels of government, that there may be an alternative in the works, but we may not know what that is yet. And I hope that change of direction in the wind makes it all the way down from Canning Highway to the intersection with Albany Highway to Ms Mascarenhas. I'm not hopeful about a retention of the full $20 million of funding. I think most of us know, particularly after a 4-year process, that would be optimistic. I don't think it's likely. I hope it does happen. I don't think that we should rule that out entirely. And I hope that whatever that might fund, whether it's through this agreement or a separate funding scheme that may become available, that we can revisit some of the very important things that the initial RAF project in totality or potentially in its 3 phases can be revived in some form. But what I would finish off in saying is that if that opportunity does present itself in the future, I ask those who have been a part of this, who rolled up their sleeves for the RAF, to stay engaged, to keep turning up. We can actually keep going on this, not now, but hopefully in the not too distant future. And the reason I think it's important they do so is because if we don't, then I think there is a risk that if we are to consider some form of improvement to the recreation and sporting facilities in this city, that we will simply end up on the same merry-go-round that we have now been on for 4 years. So with that, Mayor, I will draw it to a close, and I just reiterate again my thanks and pay tribute to those who have tried really hard to do this, and particularly those local sporting clubs as well, who may not have benefited directly from the RAF, but who nevertheless understood the significance of this project to our community and to our broader sporting.
That's 5 minutes, Councillor Warland. Did you want any further time, or is that it? All right, thank you. I've been remiss. Our local MLA, Mr Jeff Baker, is here this evening. Welcome, Mr Baker. It's a pleasure to see you here. Councillors, is there anyone who wishes to speak in favour? Councillor Russell?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Actually, I have 2 questions that I'll put on notice. And on reflection, I think one of those questions was quite trivial, so I'll just ask one of the 2 questions. So the question is, if confidentiality allows, has there been any discussion with the state government and or the town of Victoria Park to build a shared multi-user indoor court facility, or even a RAF equivalent at the Bentley Curtin Specialised Activity Centre, for example, where the Department of Primary Industries and Regional Development currently sits?
Who should I send that to? Ms Imprima?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. No, there hasn't.
Thank you. Yeah, if I'd like to speak to the item now.
Okay, speaking for or against?
Speaking for.
Please proceed.
So yes, we are speaking to this item again because of numbers. I happen to like numbers. Numbers, when used correctly, provide the cold, hard reality that will cut through any political theatrics. The fiscal numbers that were presented at the March OCM and repeated tonight are so compelling that, in my opinion, Council need to effectively close out the RAF tonight. No more spin. So with that, I wish to express how truly gutted that the RAF program has come to this end, and that the SCP will not be realised in this respect. I can understand how the community must feel quite deflated. For me, this entire adventure has been draining in that it has polarised the community, and that this polarisation has been largely based upon very emotive and indeed subjective views from both sides. I just wish to break down the pertinent schedule of events of this program that has brought us to this point. November 2020, Council endorses the business case documents, being the project definition plan and the operational feasibility report, and requests the City to peer review said documents with respect to their fiscal elements. February 2021, Council defers the approval of the business plan, the plan being a series of documents necessary to obtain state funding until the Deloitte's peer review is complete and presented to Council. Remember, the business plan is not the business case. The officer's report advises Council that the state government were very positive of the RAF and expected the business plan to be approved by Council for the state to give it further consideration. February 2021, the language of the RBA was, and I quote, "The board will not increase the cash rate until actual inflation is sustainably between 2 to 3%, between the 2 to 3% range. The board does not expect these conditions to be met until 2024 at the earliest. Hence, considering the RAF design and construction contingency levels were greater than 3%, and the procurement, construction and commissioning of the RAF due May 2024, then in my view, based upon the public advice from the RBA, the self-sustainment principles and therefore the viability of the RAF was not at great risk. March 2021, the peer review is presented to Council and Council subsequently approves the business plan. Against the PDP schedule, Council approval of the business plan was only 1 month late. August 2021, Council decides to defer the concept and schematic design and to await for a report in December 2021 on the progress of any funding commitment from the state government. Now, it should be noted at this point that Council were guided by the PDP, to which, with respect to schedule stated, we reiterate that this program expressly assumes that design works do not commence until June 2021, allowing for the project scope to be finalised based on final funding commitments, that is the state funding. Design activities can commence earlier in the event that state funding is finalised prior to that date, which would result in an earlier RAF opening date. The design works include concept, schematic and detailed design phases. So in effect, the final scoping works, that is, the scale and the offerings of the project, is a function of the funding levels, if any, from the state government. This was a prudent approach. I ask you, why enter into a design which is a significant cost to the municipal budget if the construction and operation of that specific design cannot be funded? Hence, in my view, based upon the PDP to which Council endorsed, Council were in a holding pattern pending some form of commitment from the state government. December 2021, Council notified that the business plan, which was approved by Council in March 2021, was submitted by the City to the State in October 2021. May 2022, State Government hands down the financial year 2022-23 budget, to which it reports an operating surplus for the financial year 21-22 of $5.7 billion and a forecast operating surplus for FY 22-23 of $1.6 billion. There is no budget set aside for the RAF. Let me say that as a percentage, 20 million is 0.35% of the FY 21-22 operating surplus. To my knowledge, the state government have never given a reason as to why the RAF did not receive a budget allocation to Guernsey, and that truly disappoints me, and I'm sure the community likewise. May 2022. Contrary to the advice given in February 21, the RBA initiated the increase in the cash rate. Every month henceforth, other than April 2023, has seen a cash rate increase.
Sorry to interrupt, Councillor Russell. That is 5 minutes. I'm happy to move a motion. You be granted a further 5 minutes. Is anyone willing to? Councillor Warland, thank you. Councillors, please cast your votes on a motion that Councillor Russell be granted a further 5 minutes to speak. And Councillor Cridland, how would you like to vote on that?
I vote yes.
All right. That was unanimous. Thank you, Councillor Russell. You have a further 5 minutes.
Thank you, Council, for your patience. So, in my view, and in hindsight, May 2022 was a watershed moment for the RAF in that the state government, through their non-inclusion within the state FY 22-23 budget, indicated their non-support of the RAF, and the cash rate started to increase. The City and the Council were immediately on the back foot and needed to re-evaluate the scope and therefore capital and operating funding arrangements while still meeting the conditions of the federal funding agreement. No easy task. Now, to their credit, the City looked at the original layouts and other community concerns and proposed a staged concept based upon a realignment that better suits the golf course and de-risks construction costs. Unfortunately, outside influences such as the cost of debt and a very tight construction market has overtaken us. And therefore, this is why we are here today. I simply agree with the City that the RAF Stage 1 is simply not fiscally viable as it stands. Even if, in my opinion, Council were to relax the self-sustainment criteria and therefore proceeding in such an uncertain environment would be a risk to the City's future finances. You know, I dearly wish to have an aquatic centre. I truly do. However, I'm afraid our window of opportunity of a RAF-style aquatic centre was on losing ground due to external factors from mid to late 2022. This ultimately manifested itself in the cold, hard, fiscal numbers presented at the March SEM and tonight that the RAF is not financially viable. No political spin will change that fact. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Russell. Councillors, is there anyone who wishes to speak against the officer recommendation? Is there anyone else who wishes to speak in favour of the officer recommendation? Councillor Brenda Brandis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It is quite a disappointing outcome as to where we have got to right now and are losing funding. Unfortunately, it's been a hurdle too large for us to actually deal with. This project commenced 2018, and back at that point in time, the administration was requested to actually source funding, to source state funding, consider other alternatives, other venture partners, including tertiary institutions as well. And the size of the funding required for the initial scope of the project, which was quite a grand project, was never going to achieve what was required. As Councillor Russell articulated, he went through the timeline. There were delays along the way, and because the funding was not received early enough, we met with cost escalation, we met with interest rate increases, and other detrimental factors that were actually going to impact the delivery of this project. The PDP, Project Definition Plan, and Operating Feasibility studies that were approved took council on the journey. We identified that if we were to commit $20 million worth of city funds to the project, that this might actually make it known that the city was actually committed and serious to funding the aquatic centre, and that would actually attract state funding. That was never to be the case. So the early commitment from the city never achieved the outcome for state funding. We approached this with one concept, and that was the grand concept, with everything included. That was the only offering that we were undertaking. In doing so, we didn't allow ourselves opportunities to actually explore other alternatives early enough and possibly secure a project that could have been more viable. There was no flexibility with regard to this on the basis that the entire project of that scale would create the synergies and the funding requirements to actually support the operational feasibility. Noting that part of the requirement for this project was not only a return to the operator and to make sure that the operator was successful, but also a return to the city, and that a sinking fund would actually be achieved with regard to the project. At the February 2021 annual electors meeting, COSPRA, Ms. Cecilia Brooke spoke about a letter that had been circulated, and this had a clear indication that the then Honourable Minister Mick Murray had indicated that funding was not coming forth in that year or in the forward years. Again, Councillor Troy actually put forward a motion last year to actually get clarity from the state government and to actually try to ensure that we are very clear as to whether the state is going to fund or not. And the response was from the Minister also very clear. I'm not sure we needed a third response. It was quite evident that the state was not keen to fund. And as Councillor Russell has articulated, the surpluses have been significant and nothing has been forthcoming. Funds for a similar project have been channelled into the East Perth WACA development. Cost escalations have not occurred in the last 12 months. They commenced when COVID actually took hold in 2020. That 2021 year, construction and manufacturing CPI cost indexes went up nearly 20%, and then the year after about the same again. And that was our fundamental problem. We firstly had no funding, and then secondly, we had a project which was now going to exceed $100 million. The Deloitte report provided a lack of comfort. It had a one-page disclaimer, and that concerns me a lot. it concerns me that the disclaimer included things like cash flows, the forecasting, and the revenue streams. They weren't prepared to actually support the numbers underlying the financial viability from that perspective. They supported methodology, which was fine, but that doesn't actually firm up the financial viability. So,
Councillor Brenda Brandis, that is 5 minutes. I will move the motion that you be granted a further 5 minutes to speak. But before we do that, I think we've lost Councillor Cridland. Can we try and connect Councillor Cridland to the debate now? Hello, Councillor Cridland. Just making sure you can hear us and that you're reconnected to the meeting now.
I have. Thank you very much.
Oh, very good. Councillor Brenda Brandis has just reached the 5 minute mark of his speech. I'm moving a motion that he be granted a further 5 minutes. Could I have a seconder, please? Councillor Warland, thank you. All those in favour of a motion that Councillor Brenda Brandis be granted a further 5 minutes to speak, please cast your votes. And how would you like to vote on that, Councillor Cridland?
Affirmative, thank you.
All right, that was unanimous. Thank you, Councillor Brenda Brandis. You have a further 5 minutes to speak.
thank you, Mr. Mayor, and fellow councillors. I was nearing the conclusion anyway, so this won't take very long. In summary, the project's financial viability was the issue, and councillors have undertaken a painful process to actually ensure that they acted in the best interest of the entire community, making sure that we did have a financially viable project, which was not to be the case in the end. Elected members were actually taking into consideration not only the project, the operator for consideration, the return to the city, but also the ratepayers as a whole. So unfortunately, we are where we are. We cannot support a project that even at a stage 1 will actually not be financially viable. We're in a situation that it needs a whole lot more funding than we actually have available. And for this reason tonight, I will be supporting the officer's recommendation. And I thank the administration for the amount of work that they've had to undertake over the last 5 months to actually reassess the costings, which have now become apparent. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Brenda Brandis. Councillors, is there anyone who wishes to speak against the officer recommendation? Is there anyone else who wishes to speak in favour of the officer recommendation? I might say a few words.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, I don't know if I should speak before you or not.
Oh, Councillor Cridland, if you would like to speak now, then the microphone is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. This has been a long project. We've been working on it for a long time. There's been an enormous amount of effort from the city staff and from contractors, and the project has been substantially delayed. I can't see who's there at the meeting, but I've heard from the audio that Mr. Jeff Baker is there. I'd like to thank Mr. Jeff Baker as our local state member for his very solid support and his advice to all of us on council that we needed to act promptly and keep this project moving so that we could keep the state government support. It is sad that there is a motion before the council tonight to bury this project because we have a demonstrated need for the facilities. Some people see the aquatic facilities as the highlight. Other people see the new golf clubhouse and facilities there as the highlight. Other people see the building of indoor courts as the highlight. But whatever you personally and your friends see as the highlight of this project, we have an urgent and desperate need for it. South Perth has, as we all know, all of us sitting on the council, some of the worst and poorest facilities in Perth. Indeed, if you go to a regional centre, you see facilities far better than ours. To travel like Southern River, Joondalup, Belmont, Fremantle, to play in facilities as their home ground because we, supposedly an affluent inner city suburb, don't
You're breaking up a little bit, Councillor Cridland. Could I get you to repeat the last 10 seconds there?
Sure. We have the George Burnett Centre, which provides half of an indoor court. That is pretty well the sum of all of our facilities. As a council, we should be embarrassed by the facilities we provide for our community. We should be embarrassed by how much we have delayed this project. We have taken this project from being obviously financially viable and taken it through delay and through demands and insults made to the state government, to the state where they aren't currently providing funding for us. It just shows that if you delay long enough and if you listen to small parts of the community and ignore the overwhelming majority of the community, you can kill really good projects which are absolutely needed. What does that leave South Perth? It leaves it with the same poor facilities that we have. It's not financially viable, as Councillor Brindlebrand has said, and that is if we look at the figures now and we look at the rules that we imposed, that it has to make money. Thank God we don't apply that same rule to any other service that the council provides, because if that was the case, we wouldn't provide anything for our community. And tonight I feel very sorry for the children of our city, because I do care about you, and I feel very sad for the way that the council has failed you and failed to look forward and provide proper planning forward for proper facilities for you into the future. I've been on council, I don't know, around 15 years, and this is one of the saddest matters that I've had before me, because I feel like I have failed, and I feel that this motion will be the culmination of a fairly small but vocal and determined push to stop South Perth having the proper facilities that it should have for its community. And yes, this may not, in the current circumstances, have made money, but it is not what we value, or it's not how we should value our services in a local government. We aren't a business like BHP that shuts down mines when commodity prices change. We are providing amenity and services to our community, and we should pay.
Councillor Cridland, sorry to interrupt. That is 5 minutes. I will move a motion that you be granted a further 5 minutes. Is there?
That's not necessary, Mr. Mayor. I think I don't think anything further I say will probably change the debate. So I'll just end at that point.
All right. Thank you, Councillor Cridland.
To speak.
Councillors, is there anyone else who wishes to speak either for or against the officer recommendation who hasn't already spoken? No. In that case, I'll say a few words. Councillors, as you all know, Council unanimously voted in November of last year to revise the scope and delivery of the RAF project so it could be delivered in 3 independent and financially viable stages. That unanimous decision requested the City CEO to report to Council by no later than March 2023. A special Council meeting was convened for that purpose on 30 March of this year, and prior to that special Council meeting on 30 March of this year, the City Administration made available its advice on the economic viability of the RAF in the current economic circumstances. In a well-drafted and comprehensive officer report, the City Administration, I think correctly, noted that Stage 1 of the RAF project had a capital shortfall of $20 million, not including any amount that the City might have borrowed as part of the City's own $20 million contribution. That officer report also correctly noted that the City's cost of debt had almost tripled in the preceding 12 months, and that the rapid increase in interest rates ruled out borrowing the $20 million capital shortfall. As you all know, the officer recommendation for the 30 March 2023 Special Council meeting was that Council, among other things, note that the proposed RAF Stage 1 has a significant capital funding shortfall, and that Council request the Chief Executive Officer not to progress delivery of the RAF project. Credit where credit's due. When economic circumstances changed, and when the City Administration came to the view that the RAF was no longer economically viable, the City Administration's recommendation to the Council changed accordingly. And I, for one, thank the City officers for their rigour and their candour in that respect. In a close vote at the Special Council meeting on 30 March 2023, Council ultimately voted to seek a final decision from the State Government, seeking the funds to bridge the $20 million capital shortfall. I supported Councillor Worland's alternative motion and the ultimate Council decision. Without wishing to relitigate the past, I was of the view, and I remain of the view, that the marginal cost associated with Councillor Worland's motion was very minor. I believe, and I still believe, that we owed it to our community to seek a final answer from the State Government, given what was proposed by the officer recommendation. As we know, Mr Bradford subsequently sent a letter to Mr Templeman dated the 4th of April 2023 that appears at page 7 of the attachments to tonight's agenda. That letter essentially laid the cards on the table as they were in March and April 2023 and noted that high interest rates, escalation, uncertainty around the economic climate and the requirement of no subsidy from city rates revenue contributed to the City's recommendation. The interim effects of inflation alone will have rendered the project unviable by that point. Absent a third-party saviour with $20 million to spare, who is willing to bridge that capital funding shortfall, the City officers are quite correct. The recreation and aquatic facility is not viable, not financially viable in the current economic climate. On that basis, I support the officer recommendation. Councillors, this decision, and Councillor De Souza, thank you. Councillors, could you please cast a vote as to whether or not I should be granted a further 5 minutes to speak? Councillor Credland, how would you like to vote on that?
I vote yes.
Thank you. That was unanimous, and thank you, councillors, for the indulgence. I'll be brief. If we cannot deliver the RAF for our community, then the challenge before Council now is to go back to our community strategic plan. Council and the City Administration must shift our focus and our resources to delivering what we can deliver for our community. And so I ask Council, and I also ask our wider community to come together. This has been a divisive issue, but we should now come together and unite towards delivering what we can for this community. We still have a community to serve, and we must do that to the best of our ability. Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak either for or against the officer recommendation who hasn't already spoken? No? In that case, Councillor Choi, if you'd like to wind up, you have the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. In closing, I support my fellow colleagues' sentiments, well, mostly anyway. I want to thank the community for joining us on the RAF journey. I too share in the disappointment. It is a joint disappointment, but it is what it is. Whilst always being optimistic, we had to remain realistic. It's been a tough gig for myself, and I'm sure others as elected members, especially over the past year. What has kept me going and keeps me going is acknowledging and being grateful for the lucky district we still live in, with or without a RAF. It's the people who are the most important assets in the city, not just the facilities. Although I do agree more facilities would be great. But it's time for us now to move on with business as usual, including projects that are achievable and which the community can still benefit from. And I hope in a less polarised and more cohesive way into the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Choi. I'll now put the officer recommendation to the vote. Councillors, please cast your votes. Councillor Quidland, how would you like to vote on this item?
I vote no.
All right. So the officer recommendation on item 10.1.1 has been carried 7 votes to 2. For the benefit of those who are listening via live streaming, those who voted, that's not right. There we go. So for the benefits of those who are listening via live streaming, those who voted in favour of the officer recommendation were Councillor Stephen Russell, Councillor Jennifer Navard, Councillor Mary Choi, Councillor Ken Manolis, myself, Mayor Greg Milner, Councillor Andre Brender-Brandis, Councillor Blake D'Souza. Those who voted against were Councillor Nick Warland and Councillor Glenn Credland. Okay. We're moving on to the next item now that's been withdrawn for discussion this evening. That is item 10.3.2, which is entitled, bear with me, Tender 3 of 2023, supply, installation and maintenance of bus shelters with advertising space. There is an officer recommendation. I'm also aware that Councillor Russell has an alternative motion. I might ask a question of the administration at this point, and I don't know if it's to Ms Amprimo or Mr Adams, but my question is, would there be any adverse consequences or potential adverse consequences for the city if this item were to be deferred until next month's council meeting? Ms Amprimo?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The tender responses expire on the 13th of June, so we would need to request that the respondents extend the validity of their tenders. But we believe that they would be likely to accept this if we made that request.
Thank you, Ms Amprimo. My next question is to the city's governance team. Can I, at this point in the proceedings, move a motion to defer item 10.3.2 to the next council meeting, or by no later than the June 2023 ordinary council meeting? Ms Fry?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. Okay. Councillors, I'm going to move a motion to defer item 10.3.2 to the next council meeting, whenever that is, or certainly by no later than the June 2023 ordinary council meeting. And if anyone is willing to second that motion, then I'll provide my reasons as to why I think a deferral is appropriate. Councillor D'Souza, thank you. Okay. So councillors, there is an alternative motion that I understand will be moved tonight if this deferral is not carried. We received the original version of the alternative motion on Sunday night. So I read through that alternative motion on Monday morning and I prepared my speaking notes for tonight. At 11:29 p.m. last night, we received a second version of the alternative motion. So I imagine, like some of you, I read through the second version of the alternative motion this morning and revised my speaking notes for tonight. At 12:15 p.m. this afternoon, we received the third version of the alternative motion, and at 1:18 p.m. this afternoon, we received the fourth version of the alternative motion. Councillors, this is a very significant matter. It has a value to the city of $750,000 plus the costs of maintaining and replacing the relevant bus shelters over a period of 10 years. The alternative motion proposes terminating the current tender process and starting again from scratch with a new tender framework as outlined in the alternative motion. Councillors, I've got to say I'm deeply uncomfortable with trying to set tender conditions on the fly. I do think that's dangerous, and I do think that risks jeopardising the $750,000 licence fee that's presently on the table. More than that, with the best will in the world, I haven't had an opportunity to properly consider the latest version of the alternative motion. I haven't had an opportunity to properly think it through. The first and second versions of the alternative motion had, at least in my opinion, some pretty serious problems, but I don't know what to make of this latest version because I simply haven't had enough time to properly consider it. And I suspect I'm probably not the only elected member in this position. We've just heard from Ms Amprimo that a deferral until next month may result in the current tenders expiring, but the City Administration seems confident that the tenderers would be willing to extend their deadlines. If not, perhaps the City can convene a special council meeting to consider this item before those tenders do expire. The only other option, as far as I can see, is voting on an alternative motion that I am, and I suspect others might be, simply not across the detail of. Given the stakes involved, I hope you will agree to a deferral of this item. That's all I've got to say. Councillor D'Souza, you were the seconder. I'll give you your opportunity to speak, and then I'll go to Councillor Brenda Abrandis because I see he's raised his hand.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, I agree with the sentiments you've raised. No doubt it's well intentioned by Councillor Russell, but having to track 4 iterations of a significant motion which seeks to intervene in a tender, which is something that, as a matter of practice, I don't think council should do unless there are compelling reasons. I think it is appropriate to enable more time to further refine and workshop in detail whatever issues Councillor Russell has raised.
Thank you, Councillor D'Souza. Councillor Brenda Abrandis, did you wish to speak or asking a question?
A question, Mr. Mayor.
By all means.
Thank you. Question for the administration. If some of the aspects in the alternative motion were to be incorporated to restrict or to, I suppose, provide more definition around what is appropriate advertising, would this result in a re-tender process? Would we have to undertake a new tender?
Ms Amprimo?
The amendments that are proposed in the alternative motion would require us to go back to cancel the current process and go back to the market completely, yes.
Councillor Russell.
Question to governance, thank you. Is this deferral a procedural motion or is it a formal motion, a substantive motion?
Ms Fry?
This one is a substantive motion, it's not a procedural.
Okay, so in that case, it's a alternative motion?
Ms Fry?
No.
Is there such a thing as a deferral as a motion then, in this respect, as a formal motion?
So the standing orders are silent on deferrals. If we can defer this item before it goes into, if it goes into debate, then you have to adjourn the debate. You can't just defer the item.
Okay, so this is my question to the Mayor. So my alternative motion came in first, yeah? This motion has now come in second. So the question is, why have you gazumped my alternative motion? This is not the way that this council has performed historically.
Thank you for the question, Councillor Russell. As I understand it from the Governance Department, that a motion for deferral is not an alternative motion. So even though there is a rule of thumb, it's not in the standing orders or any legislation that I'm aware of, that as a general rule, where there's multiple alternative motions, the first that was filed in time gets to go first. A motion for deferral, if I've understood the governance team correctly, is not an alternative motion. Ms Fry, is there anything that you'd add to that?
Okay, so my understanding then is that you've brought this motion to the floor because the standing orders are silent?
That's my understanding, Councillor Russell.
Okay, I wish to raise procedural motion 11.1G, F, that the ruling of the presiding member be disagreed with.
At this point, I might call a small adjournment so that we can get some advice from the Governance Department. now at 7:22 p.m. I have had the opportunity to take a little bit of advice from Ms Fry and from Mr Adams. Mr Adams, could you let the elected members know what the position is?
So the Mayor actually hasn't made a ruling, so I'm not sure how you would go about raising a procedural motion to disagree with a ruling. A deferral motion is exactly that, a motion to defer, and it makes complete sense that you do it before you open debate on a substantive or an alternate motion. Otherwise, you have to move a procedural motion to adjourn debate. If you disagree with the notion of deferring the item, then it makes complete sense to vote against deferring it. So that's the option. So the Mayor's moved a deferral motion. If Council doesn't agree with the concept of deferring this item and wishes to progress to debate, then vote against the motion to defer.
Has everyone understood that? All right. I think we've just had myself and Councillor D'Souza speak to the deferral motion. Does anyone wish to speak against the deferral motion? Councillor Brenda Abrandis.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, I would actually like to talk against the deferral of this item. A few reasons. Firstly, at the agenda briefing, a lot of good questions were asked. We had a deputation, and it was actually quite clear as to what the concerns were. Councillor Russell has gone to an extreme amount of effort and work here, and has tirelessly put together a final version, and the earlier versions were not significantly different. They have been varied. To read this final version is not a huge impost on any of us compared to the amount of documentation we ordinarily get in a month of agenda briefing notes and ordinary council meeting notes. So this is not a huge impost. It's relatively clear. Councillor Russell's motion has moved and progressed and actually got to a final position, and I think it deserves the consideration and should be discussed tonight. So for this reason, I am actually going to vote against this deferral, and I'll also vote against it because following the response from the administration that if we were to consider some of these appropriate amendments to actually ensure that we have a better outcome with regard to advertising and not impact the community and the children, then this entire item would actually need to be retendered. So we're in the same situation again. So for that reason, I will vote against this deferral. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brenda Abrandis. Councillors, is there anyone who wishes to speak in favour of the deferral motion? No. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak against the deferral motion? No. In that case, I'll wind up. The only thing that I would say, Councillor Brenda Abrandis argued that the previous versions of the alternative motion are not substantially different to the current version. I do disagree with that. At least the first and the second versions of the alternative motion would have had the effect of excluding any advertisements from, and I haven't got the second version in front of me, but if I recall, it would have excluded any advertisements by any entity that manufactures, I think it said, energy drinks, cordials, soft drinks, or things of the like. And I think I can understand the intention of that. The intention is to prohibit the advertisements of fizzy, sugary drinks. But at least the first and the second versions of the alternative motion had the effect of prohibiting any advertisements from anyone that manufactured any of those things, even if the advertisements themselves were for very, very healthy things. And I give you the example of Woolworths. Woolworths manufactures soft drinks. They sell soft drinks. They also manufacture and sell a lot of other things, but the first and the second versions of the alternative motion would have excluded any advertisements from Woolworths, which is the largest supermarket chain in Australia. Similarly, Coles manufactures and sells its own brand of soft drinks. The first and the second versions, at least, of the alternative motion would have excluded any advertisements from Coles, not just fizzy drinks, but anything manufactured or sold by Coles, which knocks out any advertisements from the second largest supermarket chain in Australia. Now, again, I haven't had a terribly long amount of time to sort of consider the impacts of the various versions of this alternative motion, but I strongly suspect if you had a new tender framework for a new tender that excluded any advertisements on behalf of either of the two largest supermarket chains in the nation, that just might undermine the market attractiveness of the tender and might just result in a licence fee payable to the city of less than the current $750,000 that is on the table.
Point of order.
Yes, Councillor Russell, what is your point of order?
Standing Order 8.8, relevance. You are going to the argumentative, or you're going into debate on the item itself. Could you please, this is just a deferment, just refer to the deferment.
Well, Councillor Russell, as you're well aware, in winding up, that's the opportunity that the person who is winding up is able to rebut any points that have been made during the debate against the motion. I wouldn't have said a word but for Councillor Brenda Abrandis saying that the first two versions or the earlier versions of the alternative motion were not different from the current version. On the very limited time I've had to consider the matter, I'd suggest that actually there might be a really, really big and a very, very significant difference that Council might want to bear in mind when considering whether or not they ought to defer this particular motion. So I'm not carrying that point of order, I'm sorry. But I've just about come to the end of what I was going to say anyway. Councillor Brenda Abrandis, did you have something to say, or can I put the deferral motion to the vote? I don't think you can ask a question at this point, Councillor Brenda Abrandis. I'm winding up and I'm about to put the item to the vote. I don't think there's scope for any questions at this point. So with that, I put the motion to defer item 10.3.2 to the vote. Councillor Cridland, which way would you like to vote on this?
I vote in the affirmative.
Thank you. I think we're waiting on one more vote. All right, the motion to defer has been lost. It's been lost 4 votes to 5. For those who've been listening via live streaming, those who voted in favour of a motion that item 10.3.2 be deferred were myself, that's Mayor Greg Milner, Councillor Blake D'Souza, Councillor Nick Warland and Councillor Glenn Cridland. Those who voted against the motion to defer were Councillor Stephen Russell, Councillor Jennifer Navard, Councillor Mary Choi, Councillor Kim Manolis and Councillor Andre Brenda Abrandis. With that, we move to the item itself. Councillor Russell, you do have an alternative motion that I understand that you wish to move. If you would like to move that alternative motion, you may do so now.
Oh, okay. Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, so the alternative motion that Council declines all tenders submitted in response to tender number 03-2023, supply, installation and maintenance of bus shelters with advertising space. 2, advise all tenderers to tender number 03-2023 of its cancellation, thank all tenderers for their participation and advise all tenderers of a forthcoming new tender based upon an amended scope. 3, commence a new procurement process for the supply, installation and maintenance of bus shelters with advertising space based upon tender number 03-2023 scope with the following amendments. A, Remove the bus shelter at bus stop 11911, being the bus stop shelter at Felmer Street before Coote Street opposite Como Primary School from the scope. B. With respect to restrictions on advertisement and signs, Roman numeral 1B, B shall be amended to not display or promote the smoking, vaping, tobacco products or vaping products, Roman numeral 2. E shall be amended to not display or promote alcoholic products or the consumption of alcohol, Roman numeral 3. Add an additional restriction, not to display or promote energy drinks, fermented drinks, sugar-sweetened and intensely sweetened drinks or the consumption of such. Definitions are per State Government Health Department, their Healthy Options WA How to Classify Food and Drinks Guide latest revision. Roman numeral 4. Add an additional restriction, not display or promote discretionary or fast foods, and where the entity retaining such provides a public drive-through in-person order and collect service at any of their food outlets within the state boundary. The term discretionary food is per the Australian Dietary Guidelines latest revision. Roman numeral 5. Add an additional restriction, not display or promote gambling in any form or any entity associated with such. The State Government Lottery West is excluded from this restriction. Roman numeral 6, add an additional restriction not to include audio content. And Roman numeral 7, add a note stating the local government shall be the final arbiter with respect to the suitability of an advertisement in all respects. And if it considers an advertisement unsuitable, then the contractor shall remove or make good the advertisement within 48 hours. 4. Bring to council for determination any additional bus shelters that the successful tenderer proposes as a variation to contract. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Russell. Does anyone wish to second Councillor Russell's alternative motion? Councillor Brenda Abrandis has seconded it. Councillor Russell, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Councillor Brenda Abrandis. So the reasons are as follows. 1, with respect to 3A, as the bus shelter within the current tender is opposite the Como Primary School, then notwithstanding the proposed additional restrictions, it is deemed appropriate to not allow advertising of any form within the locality of a school. If the successful tenderer wishes to make up for the loss of this advertising bus shelter as a revenue stream, then the tenderer can do so as a post-contract variation. 2, with respect to 3B1, to remove any doubt, the condition includes vaping and vaping products. The New South Wales Government Health Department, and the hyperlink given, states many vapes also contain nicotine, the same highly addictive substance found in tobacco cigarettes. As the statement notes many and not all, then there is a possibility that some vape products do not contain nicotine. Nevertheless, as New South Wales Government Health states, vapes can contain the same harmful chemicals found in cleaning products, nail polisher, remover, weed killer and bug spray. They just don't put it on the pack. Then it is considered prudent to remove any ambiguity by including vaping into the condition. The city's condition currently carries this ambiguity. With respect to 3B, 2, 3 and 4, the inclusion of these conditions is to align any advertisement with the intent of the city's 2020 to 2025 public health plan, which has the purpose of providing a 5-year framework of the city's commitment to improve the health and well-being of its community. This plan, like all strategies and policies, are in effect the council's social contracts or agreements with the community and therefore must be given due regard. With respect to 3B5, although there may be state and federal level legislation in place to prevent the advertisement of gambling, noting the decade-plus term of the tender, it is deemed prudent to include this restriction to assure confidence that gambling advertisement other than the state-sponsored Community Lottery West is prohibited. And 5, with respect to 4, the citing of advertisements within the community, particularly within residential areas, has the propensity to be contentious. To this effect, council representing the community and in the absence of any policy, then council should be the final decision makers to where any additional bus shelters are to be located. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Russell. Councillor Brenda Brandis, you're the seconder. Would you like to say something?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Okay, with regard to this alternative motion, I do support it. Firstly, last week we had a very detailed and diligent deputation provided by Ms. Ledger. So all the information with regard to the detrimental side effects of poor advertising affecting the community, and in particular the children who are impressionable with regard to advertising. It is for this reason that it is a real concern that we take the initiative and make an ethical decision here with regard to what advertising would appear on our bus shelters. The City of South Perth has got a health plan, and that health plan has identified some of the grave concerns and some of the poor habits affecting health. So we do have a starting point which is actually not in the best interest for the community, and adding poor quality advertising with the possibility of some of these items that Councillor Russell has identified should be considered for removal is only going to make things worse. Councillor Russell's motion identifies key issues: smoking, vaping, tobacco products, alcoholic products, energy drinks, fermented drinks, and sweet and sugary drinks, and also fast food. This is the crux of what the health pandemic is within our community. Fast food, sugary food, drinks, and nicotine. To date, we don't really make any money from these shelters, not the $75,000 a month as this possible tender will achieve. So we're starting from a point where we actually don't really have the revenue. Any revenue would be better than no revenue. $75,000 is probably not an appropriate trade-off when we're considering the value of our children and our communities. So we really should be thinking, is this appropriate? Is this the sort of advertising that we'd want in our community, close to our schools, whether it be Como, Wesley, Aquinas or Penrose? We should be trying to actually connect the values in our health plan with what we're actually approving here as councillors. So Councillor Russell has spent a lot of time working through this. His fourth version before us tonight has obviously taken a lot of additional consideration and diligence, and he's achieved a very good outcome, and he's obviously identified highly appropriate amendments that should be given due consideration. For this reason tonight, I am supporting this alternative motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brenda Brandis. Councillors, is there anyone who wishes to speak against Councillor Russell's alternative motion? Councillor D'Souza.
I've got a question in the first instance, Mr. Mayor.
By all means.
With regards to Roman numeral 6 of Councillor Russell's motion, the restriction pertaining to not including audio content, was that even within the scope of the tender to begin with?
Who should I send that to? Ms. Amprimo?
I'm not sure that I can actually answer that, I'm afraid.
Did you wish to speak, or was it just a question?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I wish to speak against Councillor Russell's motion.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, intervening in tenders, as I said earlier, should be an absolute last resort, and only if there is an absolute compelling reason to do so. I don't think it's appropriate or it's council's remit in this regard to intervene. I don't think Councillor Russell's evaluations of what is desirable or not desirable in advertising content amounts to a compelling reason. One of the things that I think most councillors would agree with is that we need to diversify our rates base away from residential rates, because we are quite heavily reliant on residential rates, more so than other councils our size, comparison to places like Town of Vic Park, City of Belmont, As a proportion, we are heavily reliant on residential rates because of a relatively small commercial rate space and an almost non-existent industrial rate space. So we have charged the CEO to explore alternative ideas for revenue in order to put some sort of limit on rates, and he's done that. Mr. Bradford has raised in a previous budget workshop a multitude of alternative revenue ideas, and as you noted recently in a workshop, there weren't many issues with what was being proposed here. It seems sensible. It seems we're utilising an existing piece of infrastructure, in this case 25 bus stops. It's not costing us the world, and it's going to lead to a positive revenue outcome for the city. What I fear, as well-intentioned as Councillor Russell might be, what this will do is it'll send a negative market signal. It will signal to advertisers that the City of South Perth is a restrictive place to do business. And to be honest, only having 25 ad shelters as compared to, I think, 150 total shelters is in itself a moderate play. I don't think, I mean, if this was to say we put ads on every single bus shelter, then maybe I'd agree, but having 25 isn't that big a deal. So based on, I guess, the workshop we had, the city decided it would be a good idea to go to tender, and I agree with that. Now, how much staff time and effort would have been saved if at the workshop there was a signal to not proceed with the tender? We've already lost years' worth of income from the fact that we haven't had an active eye to this space, and we've charged the CEO to explore these options, and I think it's a good option recommended. But I fear that this is just going to mean we have to look to other ways to raise revenue, i.e. slugging it on residential rates. Councillors, if we vote to support Councillor Russell's motion, I fear we're squandering one of the rare opportunities we have to diversify our revenue base away from residential rates. The $750K over 10 years plus costs we receive, I think outweighs any negative risks. And I just think if we want to be a council which diversifies our revenue base, we can't support the alternative motion. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Sousa. Councillor Brenda Brandis, you've spoken. Is that a question? Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have two questions with regard to this tender. So firstly, just confirmation from the city that the approval of this tender would enable the administration to actually increase the number of bus shelters with advertising without bringing that back to council. Is that correct?
Ms Amprimo, should I send that your way?
There is scope within the document if a contract was formed for a variation to that contract. However, that variation would need to be consistent with the contract conditions. So, for example, doubling the number of bus shelters that had advertising on would conceivably be a substantial change to the contract, so wouldn't generally be permitted within it. So it has to be only a small change to the contract. But the administration, if it was approved, could, as with any of our contracts, can vary it to a small degree.
Great, thank you, Ms Amprimo. And I have a second question. With regard to the extension that could be granted under this tender process, that would need to be brought back through to council either, would it?
Ms Amprimo?
By extension, do you mean additional shelters?
No, I mean time period, the duration.
No.
Thank you.
Thank you, officers. Councillors, is there anyone who wishes to speak for Councillor Russell's alternative motion who hasn't already spoken? Councillor Vard.
As it stands, the current tender has a 10-year by 5 format. which will ensure the city requirements follow state and federal advertising standards. However, this will not be capturing the health aspirations of some of our own public documentation in our health plan. And so, to me, we have shown bravery in stepping up to considering trees beyond what is in the state standards for that. And I think it would be noble of us to demonstrate some bravery by going beyond the government's advertising standards as well to reflect what we have put in as our health plan. We would not be alone in stepping beyond the state and federal advertising standards, as other local governments in the metropolitan area have already taken this brave step. So for that reason, I'm very prepared to support. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Navard. Is there anyone who wishes to speak against the Councillor Russell's alternative motion who hasn't already spoken? Councillor Warland?
A question, if I might start with.
By all means.
Has the city had the opportunity to consider the impact of Clause 3, Roman 4, where it talks about any entity providing a public drive-through or in-person and collect service, and whether that would unintentionally extend to things such as, you know, Uber Eats or other forms of food sharing platforms?
Who should I send that one to? Ms Amprimo?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Within the timeframes of this document, we have given it some consideration. However, I would say that when we prepare a document for tender, we go through quite a rigorous process and sign-off approval process when we put the conditions together that go in that document, and any amendment through a process of a notice of motion like this clearly hasn't gone through that process. So whilst we have provided some initial feedback on some of the challenges that might arise, I wouldn't like to say it's been fully considered.
Thank you, Ms Amprimo. Councillor Warland, another question, or did you wish to speak?
I wish to speak, if I can, or sorry. Okay. Look, I think it's well within council's remit to decide whether it accepts or doesn't accept a tender on the basis purely that the proposal put to us does or doesn't represent good value for ratepayers in our community. I don't think in this instance that this alternative motion actually does that. I think what this alternative motion does is saying that actually it's not about whether we think the proposal we've received or are asked to consider is good, whether we think the amount of money that we'd be generating from it is acceptable or otherwise. It's actually about saying, it's actually about changing the goalposts once the gate has closed. And I think from a process perspective, and Councillor De Souza did kind of touch on this earlier, but from a process perspective, that does concern me. I don't think that is the type of practice that we want to be embedding from the message that that sends to both our community, but also to businesses. We've had discussion already in this debate about the public health plan, which obviously, as I recognise, is a legislative obligation on us to complete. But I would caution councillors against referring to every plan and every element we have in every plan and strategy as being the gospel of what we therefore must follow in this chamber. One, because some of those plans make it very clear that they are only a guide and not actually, set in stone. But also because it's a very risky process if you start picking and choosing which part of our plans and strategies and policies you want to accept and which ones that you don't. And certainly there's elements of our public health plan which we've already dealt with tonight that would indicate that, there was something we should have followed through with, which we obviously have decided not to. And I think, to that end, regardless of whether it was deferred or otherwise, we're starting to have this kind of cloud hang over us, I think, around, a bit of a tender lucky dip here. You can submit a tender process, request for proposal, you can respond to that. But even if you're determined to be the best bidder and meet all the criteria, that council can retrospectively decide that the rules of engagement were wrong to begin with. That is a real challenge for us if we want to actually be able to hold ourselves up as being a good place to do business. So that's the first part. It is more around the process and what that signals. In terms of the appropriateness of trying to restrict advertising, the effect of this motion is actually asking us to cast a moral judgment on what we should or shouldn't be doing. I'm not actually sure our residents and ratepayers are asking us to do that. I certainly haven't had any correspondence to that effect from anyone. And I do wonder sometimes whether our ratepayers must think, why are we spending time having disagreements and discussions about things like this at the expense of perhaps more pressing priorities for our community? There is, of course, the risk in taking this path that we end up having the snowball effect. If we are prepared to say that we take a standard and view on what is acceptable on bus shelters, then what else are we going to then be reasonably expected to make determinations about in terms of the display of various content in other formats that we might not have even considered yet, or indeed on any other kind of issue of the day? There is that snowball effect that we should always be very mindful of. The other thing that I did find interesting about this alternative motion, I don't actually think it's poorly intended, but we could have a situation where we might say that bus shelters in the city of South Perth can't have certain forms of advertising, but the buses that then drive past and stop at those bus shelters would have that advertising. It seems to me a little bit of a funny situation where we say, sorry, we won't put it on our property, but the buses that people are actually using along those routes and along that infrastructure may in fact include that advertising anyway. And to that end, I also make the point that what we are actually saying in effect of this, again unintentionally I think, is we'll take rates from various businesses who produce and manufacture and sell the types of goods that this motion is seeking to limit, but then we'll restrict their ability to then advertise within our city the fact that they operate or indeed that they sell certain goods. So for those reasons, I don't support this alternative motion. I would have been happy to defer it to make it a little bit of an easier process for the city to try and handle this. But I would really warn councillors about the unintended effects of this alternative motion if it was to pass tonight.
Thank you, Councillor Warland. Councillors, is there anyone who wishes to speak in favour of Councillor Russell's alternative motion who hasn't already spoken? Councillor Choi.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I concur generally with Councillor Russell's sentiments and reasonings as outlined in his alternative motion. In particular, his reference to the public health plan and the 5-year framework that includes a commitment to improve the health and well-being of the community. I believe I have attempted to articulate as best I can, both in my past decision-making in this chamber on other matters that involved advertising, in my role as a council delegate to the city's public health advisory group and at councillor workshops, etc., my stance on behalf of the community on this subject matter, of the placing of limitations on third-party advertising in public spaces, especially as it relates to alcohol and junk food. Indeed, I believe, and I'm yet to receive more detail on this, that Transperth has started some sort of initiative where they are minimising this type of advertising on school bus routes. The view is this is not, or at least should not be seen as just another economic item for the council or the city anymore. Council has to strike a balance between generating extra revenue and changing community standards. I acknowledge it's not easy, and it won't be easy moving forward. As the Deputy from the Cancer Council clearly expressed at last week's Council agenda briefing, however, Council's decision on this item, being essentially a 20-year contract amounting to almost a generation, plus advertising on a further number of bus shelters throughout the city, which won't come before Council after this item is passed tonight, as it's already been discussed just now, potentially carries a long-term social impact with a social cost to the community which can't be as easily quantified. If regrettably Council's views on the behalf of its constituents were not as anticipated in relation to this item, perhaps then the relevant signage policy P308 could be updated to include conditions for third-party advertising for Council's future consideration, as I have observed other local governments already have in place throughout Australia. It is the increasing view gained during my time on this council that our constituents are expecting this council to step up and provide a stronger community leadership role, including through advocacy in chambers, as well as with the different tiers of government and external stakeholders in the background, for whatever is in the best interest of the community on increasingly prevalent matters, particularly social matters, matters that the community care about, that impacts directly on people in the community. And third-party advertising in public places, I do believe, is one of them. If the City of Mandurah can take that step up, and just as the City of South Perth took up the reins along with the City of Nedlands in respect to the recent tree preservation measures endorsed by this council, so can this council, I believe, step up for the community with respect to third-party advertising in public places. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Choi. I might just take a moment here because I think we've lost connection with Councillor Cridland and see if we can get him online.
Hello, Glenn.
Hello, Councillor Cridland. Just reconnecting you again. Councillor Choi has just spoken. I'm now going to ask if there's anyone who would wish to speak against Councillor Russell's alternative motion who hasn't already spoken. Is there anyone that would like to do that? I might ask a few questions then. So I'm not sure if these questions, we've got I think 5 of them, whether that's to Mr Bradford, Ms Amprimo or Mr Adams, but perhaps you can give me a hand signal and I'll send them accordingly. A couple of councillors have referred to the deputation that we received last week from the Cancer Council of WA. The Cancer Council of WA did send elected members some information about other local governments that have restricted marketing of certain products on local government-owned assets. The 2 local governments that the Cancer Council of WA specifically referred to in their email are Mandurah and Kwinana. So my first question is this. Has the City of South Perth administration looked into what restrictions the City of Mandurah and the City of Kwinana have implemented? And if so, how do they compare to the officer recommendation? Is that Ms Amprimo? Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. We have looked at both of those policies, and whilst Mandurah has restrictions on unhealthy food, they don't appear much more restrictive than the recommendation put forward. It should be noted, however, though, that Mandurah in particular have an overall different approach to how they deal with advertising in the road corridor, which is more based around restricting advertising more broadly and using it as a wayfinding tool rather than advertising in the way that South Perth are. So it's a little bit difficult to compare because they're 2 different purposes.
Thank you.
That was the City of Mandurah I was referring to there as wayfinding, not the City of
All right. Any comment on the City of Kwinana?
It's not substantially different.
Thank you. So my second question is, does the alternative motion proposed by Councillor Russell, does it go beyond what is in place at either of those 2 local governments?
As far as we've been able to analyse it, it does appear as if it goes beyond the position of those other 2 local governments, yes.
Thank you. My third question is, would Council passing the alternative motion potentially jeopardise the $750,000 in licence fees that the City currently stands to receive?
We would expect that the more constraints you place on a tender, the lower value you are going to get from that tender. So we would expect to get less than the $750,000.
Thank you. My fourth question is, would Council passing the alternative motion be likely to deliver much in the way of public health benefits relative to the officer recommendation?
We don't believe that it would have a material impact on public health benefits.
Thank you. And my final question is, does the City Administration recommend that Council pass the alternative motion?
So the administration has made a recommendation which reflects what we believe is the most appropriate approach and the best overall outcome for the city. as I noted earlier, we go through quite a long process to approve a document and get that in place. So whilst we've given some consideration to the alternative motion, we haven't given it that same level of consideration as we normally would. So we would be recommending that the officer's recommendation is supported.
All right, thank you, Ms Amprimo. With that, I will speak, and I'm speaking against the alternative motion. And I'm also foreshadowing the officer recommendation in the event that the alternative motion fails. Councillors, the alternative motion is no doubt well-intentioned. Unfortunately, the first two versions of the alternative motion, at least in my opinion, were unworkable in practice. I've already alluded to why I thought that was during the discussion on the deferral motion. I haven't had an opportunity to consider how the third and fourth versions of the alternative motion differ from the previous two versions. I'm not in a position where I can speak to the content of the fourth and current version of the alternative motion. That alone means that I can't, in good conscience, vote in favour of the alternative motion, at least not tonight, and we've decided that we aren't going to defer it. That said, I also have grave reservations about the governance process that the alternative motion represents. Let's start with a brief history of this matter. The City of South Perth has had advertising on bus shelters for over 20 years. The City Administration has advised that they're not aware of any complaints about that advertising in all that time. As we all know, the City has a signage policy, Policy P308. This policy has existed for many years, and Council has always had the ability to amend this policy if Council so chose. For whatever reason, Council has chosen not to do that. I note in passing that I do agree with Councillor Choi's point that this is probably the path that Council should take, amending Policy P308. That's a good suggestion. As Councillor D'Souza has already alluded to, the City's Community Strategic Plan, which this Council unanimously approved in December of 2021, calls upon the City to diversify and optimise its non-rate income, and also to maintain a culture of fiscal efficiency. This Council has also expressly asked the City Administration to be more cost efficient. In April of last year, Council, I think it may have been a motion brought by Councillor Manolis, passed a motion in the following terms: the CEO to evaluate the efficiency of City operations and how savings can be achieved to reduce expenditure without reducing services to the community or the maintenance of the existing city's assets. The very next month after that motion was passed, the City Administration advised Council of its intention to re-tender for bus shelter advertising during Budget Workshop 4 in May 2022. As far as the CEO is aware, no concerns or questions about advertising on bus shelters were raised at that workshop or subsequently until this item appeared on the agenda. True to Council's stated wishes, the City Administration identified the opportunity that is before us now to transfer the costs of maintaining and replacing public bus shelters to a third party whilst simultaneously generating a very substantial source of revenue. That's a win-win. That's the kind of thing that I thought this Council wanted to see from the City Administration. The City Administration put Tender 3 of 2023 out for public tender in compliance with the relevant legislation and regulations. In turn, a number of third parties submitted tenders in good faith and in accordance with the tender process. The City Administration has assessed those tenders and identified a preferred tenderer, Claude Outdoor Proprietary Limited. The contract that would be formed by the acceptance of that tender would generate $750,000 in revenue over 10 years. Councillors, that is $750,000 that could do a lot of good for this community including in the public health space. But now, at the 11th hour and arguably the 59th minute and 59th second, this alternative motion proposes that we say no to the $750,000 that could really benefit our community, and we throw away the work performed by the city administration and by the third-party tenderers to date, and that we start again from scratch. That's almost 5 minutes. Would someone be kind enough to move a motion that I be granted a further 5 minutes? Councillor D'Souza, thank you. Someone to second. Councillor Warland, thank you. Councillors, please cast your votes on a motion that I be granted a further 5 minutes. Councillor Cridland, how would you like to vote on that?
Affirmative.
Thank you. That was unanimous. Thank you, councillors, for the indulgence. So that's the first problem with the alternative motion. It is, I'm afraid, bad process, and it's bad for the city's commercial reputation. If council wanted to restrict the kind of advertisements that could appear on public property, then council could have and should have, perhaps, said so beforehand. Councillors, I take no pleasure in saying this, but this council is starting to get a bad reputation when it comes to tenders. This alternative motion won't help. If council continues down this path, providers in goods and services are naturally going to become reluctant to respond to City of South Perth tenders. This is because council will have established a reputation for getting to the tail end of a tender process and then either deciding to appoint no one or deciding to move the goalposts at the last second. Put simply, the city will get a reputation for being too difficult to deal with. This, in turn, will inevitably impact the city's ability to cost efficiently serve our community. Now, I don't know if there's a term for a local government equivalent of sovereign risk, but if there isn't, we may need to come up with one soon. I had originally planned on setting out why the drafting of the alternative motion was the second problem with the alternative motion. The first and second versions of the alternative motions had major problems that would have prohibited the advertising of a far wider range of goods and services than I assume was originally intended. I've mentioned the problems with anything manufactured or sold by Coles or Woolworths, for example, regardless of how healthy the advertised goods might have been. That alone would have undermined the attractiveness of the new tender process, and I think it would have seriously jeopardised the $750,000 that our community currently stands to benefit from. But I can't tell you what the problems with the third and the fourth version of the alternative motion might be. I simply haven't been granted enough time to properly consider them. But what I can say, as a general principle of good governance, is that tender conditions should never be drafted on the fly. That is a surefire way to get a bad outcome. So that's the second problem with the current version of the alternative motion. We don't know what the unintended consequences might be. We simply haven't had enough time to properly consider it. The third problem with the alternative motion is that, as far as I can tell, under the circumstances, the potential benefits of the alternative motions seem to be very much outweighed by the potential downsides. Councillors, the preferred tenderers under the current process recommended by the city officers don't have the ability to run any advertisements that they want. In fact, the advertisements that would be permitted by the officer recommended tender are already subject to a lot of restrictions. Page 22 of the agenda clearly states that the contractor shall only provide advertisements and signs which comply with the state and federal legislation, local laws, the city's signs policy, P308, and any codes of conduct established by the advertising industry and which exhibit high quality graphic design and finished. The contractor is already prohibited from displaying any advertisement depicting smoking or a tobacco product. The contractor is already required to comply with the alcohol advertising pre-vetting system developed by the Outdoor Advertising Association of Australia. I am not sure what public health outcome the alternative motion is going to achieve that the officer recommendation doesn't already achieve. Now, I don't know the answer to that question because we only received the latest version of the alternative motion this afternoon. But at first glance, and I'm afraid that's all I've had the opportunity for, it doesn't seem to justify killing the current tender process, jeopardising the $750,000 currently on the table and exposing the city to the kind of risk that I've highlighted by drafting tender conditions on the fly. In short, the officer recommendation already achieves, in practical terms, much of what I understand at this point in time the alternative motion purports to achieve. Whatever the intention of the alternative motion might be, it doesn't represent good governance. I don't enjoy pointing that out, but I do have a duty, as we all do, to provide for the good government of the district. I'd be derelict in that duty if I didn't bring these matters to Council's attention. Public health can be an emotive issue for many people, understandably so. As many of you know, my entire family supports public health and cancer prevention, but I can't support this. I'm foreshadowing the officer recommendation. Thank you. So, with that, is there anyone who wishes to speak either for or against the alternative motion who hasn't already spoken? I think Councillor Choi.
Mr Mayor, if
I think,
I'm happy to go after Councillor Choi.
sure. So, Councillor Choi, you've got a question?
Yeah, I've just got a question. Just looking back and reflecting back on our workshop discussions, is it correct to say that the tender in 2022 didn't go ahead? You know, as in terms of that, in those budget discussions, I believe there was some discussion around advertising, bus shelter advertising. And I note that this is coming now instead of, I think, this time last year. Can someone just clarify that for me? So I'm just trying to recall. Thank
Mr
you.
Bradford?
So the idea was first raised with me in about early April of 2022 around tenders. Having explored the possibility, and when the other resolution, Council need to bring some ideas around diversification revenue, we had confirmed the viability of going to tender for that in May 2022. After that decision, it was really a process in infrastructure to develop the tender documentation, to assess the suitable bus shelters for advertising, to look at all the appropriate materials that had to go out to tender, and then that resulted in the tender being, I think, went out late in 2022. And so there hasn't been a different tender process. It really stems from that discussion.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillor Cridland, you indicated that you'd like to speak?
Yes, please, Mr Mayor. Just very briefly, I do find this motion very intriguing on the same night that we had the RAF buried. As I understand it, the purpose behind this motion is to at some substantial cost to the city of foregoing revenue to provide some indirect public health benefit. What we've done earlier this evening with the RAF is forego a very, very substantial and direct public health benefit to, in particular, our elders, our senior citizens, and our children. And we did that all because it was going to cost us a little bit of money. Yet a little bit later, we've got a much less easily definable, and I say a much less significant indirect public health benefit, which is going to cost us a lot of money. That's one really intriguing inconsistency I see with this motion, with the approach that the majority of the council has taken tonight in respect of the RAF. If we were really concerned about direct public health benefits for our community, we would be halfway through constructing the RAF now. But we're not. We chose not to. We chose to delay the project.
Councillor Cridland, I probably have to be fair here. I'm going to jump in and perhaps if we can keep the debate on this item to this item itself.
Sure. And in respect of that particular item, we breached our contract and we didn't proceed with tenders. And that's the relevance again here with this one. What we're going to do here is again not proceed with a tender. We are going to have a really, truly remarkable reputation in South Perth as a city or a local government that you don't want to do business to. Perhaps you don't even want to give grants to. because whatever you give them by way of tender documents, they are unlikely to go ahead with that tender, or they're unlikely to use the grant for the purposes for which they agreed to take it and signed a contract. And that's the governance risk. In fact, it's become more of a risk. It's becoming too common with South Perth, and we need to have a look at our reputation. We need to be a reliable contract party, and we need to be reliable for people who want to spend a lot of money and time in putting work into providing tenders, because people can put in tenders to other local governments. They can take their money and give it to other people, other cities. They don't have to give it to South Perth. And if we are to take this approach, well, I don't think we're going to get a lot of public health benefit, but we are going to have a lot of reduced revenue, and we're just going to have people who don't want to deal with this. And for those reasons, I can't support this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Cridland. Councillors, is there anyone who wishes to speak either for Councillor Choi? A question?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm just wondering, I'm not sure if the City Administration could answer this question off the cuff, but just we'll give it a go. How many tenders has the City put out in the last 3 years, and how many of those have been rejected by this council?
Who should I send that to?
We'll have to take that on notice.
All right. Mr. Bradford?
Well, there's at least one, which is the project manager for the RAF.
Is there anyone else who wishes to speak either for or against the alternative motion who hasn't already spoken? No. In that case, Councillor Russell, you have an opportunity to wind up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, I guess I'd like to go to Councillor D'Souza's rebuttal, and I'm not sure he was clear, but council have not had a workshop which was specific to the advertising on bus shelters. To Councillor Walden's question, with respect to item 3B4, as Uber Eats does not provide a public drive-through service at their food outlet, because they don't have one, then this would be excluded from advertisements restrictions. So I believe this to be clear. Thirdly, well, the restrictions within the alternative are similar to the City of Canning tender that went to the market with successful returns by tenderers. To this effect, the City of Canning admin and the tenderers themselves are comfortable with the restrictions proposed. In addition, look, with respect, I have had a discussion with the Director of Infrastructures Services, and granted she cannot say for certain, but I believe the Director was comfortable with the latest version. Hence, in combination, Council should feel comfortable that the restrictions that I'm proposing are actually policeable, are doable. Anyway, in general, to rebut some of these, rebut some of the arguments against, let's look at the statistics in our health plan. As it says, in terms of, are we getting any meaningful community benefit? As it says, as health plan says, as it says, it all really. 26% of residents drink at high risk levels for long-term harm. Nearly 20% of residents have high cholesterol. 53% of residents are overweight or obese. Nearly 92% of residents do not eat the recommended 5 serves of vegetables a day. And 49% of residents eat less than 2 serves of fruit a day. These statistics are why the plan has key outcomes to A, investigate the control of advertising of unhealthy foods at city events and premises, and B, investigate scope and feasibility of an outdoor advertising policy restricting alcohol advertising on city-owned properties. They're the outcomes in the plan. So, noting that this tender is for 10 years plus, without any possibility for council to revisit the advertising terms in that tenure, then a future investigation with retrospective restrictions is not workable. Action needs to be taken now, and for council to walk the talk when it comes to the health plan by further restricting the advertisement of alcohol and unhealthy foods and drinks over and above the minimum set by state, federal laws and industry-owned guidelines. Furthermore, the health plan speaks to the RAF as a key enabler to increase physical activity and thereby improving health and well-being. Insufficient physical activity is a contributor to chronic diseases such as type 2 diabetes, which is also a result of poor diet, With the RAF no longer, then the control of advertising of unhealthy foods is the more pressing to ensure the health plan delivers meaningful outcomes. To respond to an argument that council is requesting a retender is subjecting the city to a negative reputational risk is speculative. It may be unfortunate and inefficient, and there may be lessons to come out of this, but ultimately, elected members need to weigh the community health benefits of this alternative motion to any speculative reputational damage. I note that, and I said this earlier, the City of Canning only recently went through the same process with respect to retendering for advertising on public street furniture. But yet their council did not consider reputational risk as a reason to retender. Indeed, in my view, the city would see a positive contribution to its reputation by including the additional restrictions. The City of South Perth would be seen as perhaps the mouse that roared in taking leadership in this space and not having to rely upon industry self-set guidelines or state federal legislation to reach better health outcomes for our community. With respect to the possible lack of interest from tenderers, then I wish to again cite the City of Canning Street Furniture advertising tender, which also had advertising restrictions similar to what I've just said. 3 tenderers responded, including Claude Outdoor Pty Limited, the City of South Perth's recommended tenderer. Hence, an argument that these restrictions would limit the tenderer pool and therefore risk an
30 seconds left, Councillor Russell.
has no substance. To the argument that this motion would result in a loss of revenue to the city, then I do not accept this, as it is subjective and indeed I believe scaremongering. This is a competitive market where private businesses operate and therefore it is in their interest to put in their best bids.
That's time, Councillor Russell. All right.
I'd like an additional 5 minutes if I may.
I don't think that's possible if it's a winding up.
Okay, fine.
But let's just check with governance if that's the case. No, that's correct. All right.
Thank you.
I will put the alternative motion to the vote. If the alternative motion fails, I've foreshadowed the officer recommendation, but for now, we are putting Councillor Russell's alternative motion to the vote. And Councillor Quidland, how would you like to vote in terms of Councillor Russell's alternative motion?
I vote no.
Thank you. All right, I'm waiting on one more vote. Okay, Councillor Russell's alternative motion has passed 5 votes to 4. For those who are listening via live streaming, those who voted in favour were Councillor Stephen Russell, Councillor Jennifer Navard, Councillor Mary Choi, Councillor Ken Manolis and Councillor Andre Brender-Abrandis. Those who voted against were myself, Mayor Greg Milner, Councillor Glenn Cridland, Councillor Nick Warland and Councillor Blake D'Souza. Okay, we're now moving on to the next item to be withdrawn for discussion this evening. That is item 10.3.3, proposed cafe/restaurant, addition to multiple dwellings, lot 174, number 60 Elizabeth Street, South Perth. There is an officer recommendation before us. I'm not aware of any alternative motion. And does anyone wish to, Councillor Choi?
Mr Mayor, yes, that's one of the reasons I actually pulled out the item, was so I could ask a question and then foreshadow an alternative motion.
Sorry, Councillor Choi, could you repeat that for me?
Yeah, sorry, that's the reason I asked to pull this item out of the list, so that I could ask a question, if I may first, and then foreshadow an alternative motion. Or if I can't ask a question, I'll just foreshadow the alternative motion and go from there.
Okay, so I've just been given word that Councillor Cridland has left the meeting. Councillor Choi, did you say you had an alternative motion?
Well, it's actually a procedural motion that clause 10.1A of the City of South Perth Standing Orders Local Law be suspended to allow an alternative motion to be moved so due consideration can be given to the electors of the district.
Sorry, could you just read that a little bit slower? I didn't quite get that.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. It's a procedural motion that clause 10.1A of the City of South Perth Standing Orders Local Law 2007 be suspended to allow an alternative motion to be moved so due consideration can be given to the electors of the district.
Might seek guidance from the Governance Department on this.
This has been done before.
All right, so are you asking the question first or are you moving?
If I may, am I allowed to ask the question first? Is that part of the, or
No,
must
go-
I move the?
No, go
alternative
ahead, you
motion
can ask the
first, is
question
that
if you want.
Okay, thank you. So I just want to know, first of all, what are the implications of deferring this, this item to a forward meeting?
Ms Shaw, should I send that your way?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So in terms of the decision-making timeframe under the statutory framework, it's a 90-day decision timeframe, which has already been exceeded by agreement from the applicant themselves. At any point in time from the date of this meeting, the applicant could make an application for review to the State Administrative Tribunal on the basis that no decision has been made, which in effect under the regulations is otherwise a deemed refusal. I don't believe the applicant would be in a position to do that. I think they would actually agree to a further extension of time to enable consideration of the item.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. Councillor Choi?
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you, Director Shaw, for that response. Given that response, I would like to move forward with my procedural motion to move my alternative motion, and which I've already gone through the wording for. I'm happy to give my reasons if you...
Well, I think you've got to be a bit clear about what you're doing. Are you moving an procedural motion to defer? Are you suspending standing orders to allow an alternative motion to be moved because it's presently out of time? What is it that you're seeking to do in first instance?
Sorry, Mr Mayor, I believe what's been done before is that an alternative motion has been moved under Part 10.1a. As under Part 10 of the City of South Perth Standing Orders Local Law 2007, an alternative motion must be submitted to the CEO by 12 noon the day before a council meeting. However, as council was only made aware of some apparent reporting anomalies on this item overnight, it was not possible to meet the standing orders requirement, and hence the need to suspend standing orders for any alternative motion to be heard.
Perhaps
And my alternative motion is to defer the item.
It's not an
Oh, you
alternate
can't.
motion. Just move
Okay.
them.
Right, I thought I was doing it the proper way. All right, so I'll do it the least formal way then, and just move a motion to defer, if I can, please.
All right, so Councillor Choi is moving a motion to defer this item. To what time frame, Councillor Choi?
Preferably to the July 2023 Ordinary Council meeting, please, Mr Mayor.
July 2023, or not the June one?
The reason I thought July is because the annual budget is already probably going to be a big item on the June agenda. So, if that's not possible or advisable by the planning department, then yeah, I'm happy to consider June. But that was what I'm putting forward is the July meeting.
Well, it's your motion, Councillor Choi. Is it June or July that you'd like to defer it to?
Well, may I please ask a question, Mr Mayor, of the planning officer?
Of course.
Director, in respect to that? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. We would prefer June. The later the decision, the more likely it is that the applicant would seek a review from the State Administrative Tribunal.
All right, so the motion is to move it to June, defer it until June 2023. I'll see if there's anyone who's willing to second that, and if there is, then perhaps you can give us your reasons as to why you're moving this motion. Does anyone wish to second this motion to defer? Councillor Navard. Councillor Choi, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you for Council's indulgence in getting through that. Yeah, as I said before, Council was made aware of some apparent reporting anomalies on this item overnight, and the public would not have been aware of those anomalies until this evening, affording no opportunity for deputations or questions on those details since remedied, and also Council requiring the time to review the amended report alongside the application and relevant policies. Those are my reasons. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Choi. Councillor Navard, did you wish to say anything as seconder?
Yes, I think there are a couple of issues there that I'd certainly be very happy to explore a bit further that related to the modifications of the building for noise, and also the confusion about the size of the advertising material and how that might relate to the residences of Elizabeth Street and Lawson Street. So that would be my reason for wanting a little bit more information. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Navard. I might ask a question at this point, and perhaps it's to Ms Shaw. What anomalies, are you aware of the anomalies that Councillor Choi is referring to?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the 2 points in respect to the noise, this is not considered a complex application under the regulations, in which case officers only have one opportunity to ask for additional information, which I believe has already occurred in respect to traffic and car parking information. So whilst it's open for the officers to request the applicant to provide an acoustic report up front, the applicant's entitled to deny that request, in which case council will need to consider the application on its merits in the absence of that acoustic report. In terms of the signage itself, the error was in the table, which is provided on page 29, in that the original officer's report contained 0.825 instead of 8.25 per sign in the total area of the sign. And in the letter or figure height and width of the sign, it had 0.75 metres for the maximum height instead of 0.075. And so the cumulative impact of that is that the sign is greater than what was otherwise provided for in the officer's original report. The city's response to that is that the recommendation against the criteria contained within the scheme to vary requirements of the sign remains the same, which is contained on page 30 of the report, but it's obviously open for council to consider the ramifications of a larger sign in that respect.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. Councillors, does anyone have any questions or wish to speak? I suppose it's been moved and seconded, so the usual procedure is to ask if anyone wishes to speak against the motion for a deferral. But if you wanted to ask questions as well, I totally understand. Councillor Warland.
Thank you, Mayor. On a question to Ms Shaw. So can you just clarify on what you just said? So the anomaly, as it were, would actually have the effect of the signage be smaller or larger?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Larger.
Okay. Yep.
Was that the only question you had, Councillor Warland?
Only question, yep.
All right. I might ask another question because I think I got the gist of what Ms Shaw was saying before, but perhaps I'll just clarify that in fact I did. So as I understand it, the sign that could be approved or the applicant, I suppose the applicant is applying for, is actually larger than what is originally set out in the report to council. Is that correct?
Thank you, Ms Mayor. So the original officer's report identified that the sign was larger than what is otherwise provided for under the local planning policy, but the error in the numbers contained within the report misidentified that the sign was smaller than what it actually is. So whilst the officer's report always identified that there was a variation, the variation is greater than that was otherwise identified in the original report.
I see. And does that justify in your opinion, because obviously it's a council decision, does that justify a deferral of this item? I suppose it's a double barrel. I'll let you answer that, then I'll ask us the second part.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So in terms of council's future consideration of the matter, the criteria for the variation remains the same regardless of how great the variation actually is. So council will still be required to consider the variation based on the character and amenity of the locality, whether the location is on the heritage list, landscape impacts, and the impact of the sign in respect to traffic and road safety.
And I guess my final question, at least for the moment anyway, would the size of the discrepancy between what was originally in the officer's report and what in fact is the case, it's over, but understand it's over than more than what we originally thought, would that change the officer recommendation?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. No, it wouldn't, based on the response that's been provided on page 30 of the report in terms of those elements I mentioned earlier.
Thank you. Okay, I think I've got a better grip of things now. Councillors, does anyone wish to speak either for or against the motion to defer? Councillor Warland.
Thank you, Mayor. Again, just very briefly, I think through Ms Shaw's answers, it's very clear that the mistake, as it were, has actually been clarified within the report itself. So it's not as if we are unaware of what is actually being sought here by the applicant. And so for that reason, I don't see any reason to defer consideration of the item, and more broadly, I don't see a reason to reject the application. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Councillor Warland. Is there anyone who wishes to speak for or against the motion to defer who hasn't already spoken? Councillor Quidland? Oh, of course, Councillor Quidland is no longer in the meeting. My bad. All right, well, if no one else wishes to speak, I'll simply invite Councillor Choi to wind up on her motion to deferral, and then I'll put the motion to defer to the vote.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, so as I said before, this is not just about this correction being made overnight in the officer's report. It's also about the public, members of the public not being aware of this correction until we're talking about it right now, probably. So for that reason, I think, you know, it's not just one sign, it's 3 signs that are larger than the original variation, which was already larger than the policy. So, and these signs face in different angles around, from what I can tell, correct me if I'm wrong, please reassure, different angles around the property, so facing the street and, you know, the suburb, sorry, the residential street, not just Canning Highway or main road. So to me, the impact is worth sitting on it for a few more weeks and having a look at it and making sure that people in the public, you know, in the public domain, residents are aware of it, and bringing it back to council till June. And if Director Shaw has said that she feels the applicant may be open to, for these reasons, be open to extending their application. I don't know, there's no guarantee to that, but yeah, I would encourage councillors to please do this, to support this motion. Thank you.
Councillor Choi has just wound up. Councillor Russell, I don't think there's any opportunity to ask questions at this point. I think my only option is to put this item, which is the motion for deferral.
Yeah, sorry, I'm not asking any questions or adding to the debate here. I'm just asking, so Councillor Glenn Cridlin is no longer here. I thought he just wasn't here for the confidential item.
He indicated to me that he has left the meeting.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
All right, so I'm putting Councillor Choi's motion for deferral to the vote. All right, the motion for deferral has been carried 6 votes to 2 for the benefit of those who are listening via live streaming. So those who voted in favour of Councillor Choi's motion to defer were Councillor Mary Choi, Councillor Kim Manolis, Councillor Jennifer Navard, Councillor Stephen Russell, Councillor Andre Brender-Abrandis, myself, Mayor Greg Milner. Those voting against were Councillor Blake D'Souza and Councillor Nick Warland. So item 10.3.3 has now been deferred as per the deferral motion. All right, that brings us to the next item that's been withdrawn for discussion this evening. That is item 10.5.1. Bear with me. Which is entitled Chief Executive Officer Key Performance Indicator Report. Mr. Bradford has declared an interest in this one, so he is now leaving the room. And I'll wait for Mr. Bradford to exit the room before continuing. Okay, so confirming that Mr. Bradford has now left the room. We have an officer recommendation and a committee recommendation before us. I haven't received any alternative motions. Does anyone wish to move the officer recommendation? Councillor D'Souza, thank you. Anyone to second? Councillor Russell, thank you. Before I invite Councillor D'Souza to speak, I'm going to ask if anyone opposes the officer and the committee recommendation. Does anyone oppose it? No. Well, in that case, I'll simply use my powers under the standing orders to declare that motion carried unanimously. All right, bear with me. That concludes item 10, I believe. If someone could please retrieve Mr. Bradford. Thank you very much. I'll just wait for Mr. Bradford to rejoin us. All right, that brings us to item 11, which is applications for a leave of absence. Councillors, Councillor Warland.
Thank you, Mayor. I request leave of absence from Thursday the 8th of June to Tuesday the 13th of June inclusive, please.
Thank you. Councillors, would anyone else like to apply for a leave of absence? Councillor Choi.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to apply for leave from the 17th of June to the 15th of July.
Thank you. Any other councillors applying for a leave of absence? No. Okay. In that case, I'm going to call for someone to move a motion that the leave of absence applications received from Councillor Nick Warland for the period of 8 June 2023 to 13 June 2023 inclusive, and the leave of absence application received from Councillor Mary Choi for the period of 17 June 2023 to 15 July 2023 inclusive be granted. Could I have a mover, please? Councillor D'Souza, thank you. Someone to second? Councillor Manolis, thank you. Councillors, please cast your votes. And we're a councillor down at the moment, so that was Councillor Brenda Abranis is not in the room. Well, in that case, that was unanimous. So thank you, councillors, for that. Item 12 is motions of which previous notice has been given. That's nil. Item 13 is questions from members. Item 13.1 is responses to previous questions from members taken on notice. That is nil. Item 13.2 is questions from members. Are there any questions from members for the administration? I think Councillor Choi was first.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just wondering whether the underground power site webpage on the city's website was updated
Ms Amprimo, should I send that your way?
with the current status.
I'll need to check the website and see what it currently has on it.
Councillor Russell, I thought I saw your hand go up there.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. A question on notice. A condition of DAP 17-01314, which is the Farmer Jacks on Canning Highway. The condition number 13 was a parking cash in lieu, which read as follows: prior to the submission of an occupancy permit, the applicant is to make a cash payment to the local government for the commercial value of any public car parking bays lost in Hobbs Avenue to accommodate service or delivery vehicles into the development site to the satisfaction of the City of South Perth. So as the development has been in operation now since, I believe, mid-2022, then I would have expected this cash to be now registered on the city's parking cash in lieu register. So hence, could the city please advise the status of this payment in terms of the city being in receipt, and if received, how the city intends to spend the funding, and if not in receipt, then why not?
Ms Shaw, can I send that your way?
Yes, thank you. The money was collected to offset the loss of 2 on-street car parking bays on Hobbs Avenue that were required to be removed to accommodate the swept path of delivery vehicles to the rear of the shopping centre. This differs to payment in lieu of parking that is otherwise required to offset a shortfall in bays to be provided in support of the development, which would likely explain why the public register of parking cash in lieu payments register was not updated. Notwithstanding, the city's public register of parking cash in lieu payments register will shortly be updated to include the payment of $17,100 for the loss of the 2 on-street car parking bays received in November 2022. The monies have not yet been expended by the city and have been deposited into the parking in lieu reserve, and there are no current plans for the use of these funds.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. Councillor Russell, another question?
Thank you. Yes, a different topic. It's actually been in the media. So 2 queries on shopping trolleys, and I'm sorry, this hasn't been on notice. So the first one, could the city advise how it manages rogue shopping trolleys abandoned on its property and the costs to the city to rehome them?
Who should I send that to?
We might need to take that on
That's
notice in detail. I've actually looked at this a little bit, and we have got I think an update on the website in terms of process for the public, in terms of pointing them to the websites that either the the supermarkets run themselves for retrieval of or an industry one, and then if they've been there for a certain period of time, to report them to the city. But we'll confirm that and get it back to you.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Russell, a further question?
Yes, so so if a shopping trolley, which is obviously a property of a shop, and that trolley was in effect abandoned on the city property, would the shop be in breach of any littering laws, the Littering Act, and therefore subject to litter infringements?
I think we'll have to take that one.
Yes. All right. Any further questions for the administration this evening, councillors? Councillor Manolis, I think, yes, then Councillor Navard.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I've had complaints from residents and business owners of of Main Street, the plane tree leaves on the footpath. Is there an increased road sweeping program when the leaves start to drop in Main Street in particular?
Ms Amprema?
I'll have to take on notice the schedule for that, but we do run the sweeping programme aligned to when there is increased littering. But I suspect that the road sweeping programme was one that was pulled back on slightly with the constraints in budget. But I don't know whether it was specifically constrained on Main Street.
Thank you.
Councillor Navard?
Oh, this question I thought might be of interest to the community, so that's why I'm asking it. This month's reporting period, contract staff costs have totalled $96,235.44. Is the city able to provide an explanation of this unusually high expenditure on this item, please?
Who should I send that to? Mr Adams?
So usually the city averages around 60,000 a month in agency staffing costs. The city's currently incurring more contract staff costs as a result of unusually high number of vacancies in the city, and that's because of the very tight labour market in WA, which has meant there's been a lot more movement in staff. So it is a little bit more than what we'd normally expect in a month. As we start to fill positions, I guess we expect that to drop back to a more normal level. But obviously we need to continue to deliver services. So if we have vacancies, then we need to employ contract staff to fill those vacancies.
Thank you, Mr Adams. Councillors, any further questions for the administration this evening? No. Okay. That brings us to item 14, which is new business of an urgent nature, introduced by decision of the meeting. That's nil. Item 15 is meeting closed to the public. So at this stage, we will need to close the gallery and we will need to go offline. I would like to say to everyone who's been listening via live streaming this evening, thank you for joining us this evening. We will have to go back offline for the duration of item 15. So thank you for your interest. And with that, I'll ask governance to take us offline. Oh, yes, I do need a mover and seconder. Is anyone so going to move that the meeting be closed to the public at this stage? Councillor Choi has moved it. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Brenda Abrandis. Councillors, please cast your votes. And that was unanimous. Thank you, councillors. perhaps if governance can confirm when we're back to live streaming. And thank you, Mr. Hindle. Okay, so we're back in open session. We've just dealt with item 15 for the benefit of those listening via live streaming and the record. On item 15.1.1, Council's decision was that Council endorse the recommendation as contained within the confidential minutes. Can I have the screenshot of who voted which way? Thank you. So the people who voted in favour of that alternative motion were Councillor Stephen Russell, were Councillor Jennifer Navard, Councillor Mary Choi, Councillor Ken Manolis, Councillor Andre Brendera-Brandis and Councillor Blake D'Souza. Those against were myself, Mayor Greg Milner and Councillor Nick Warland. On item 15.1.2, the council decision was that council endorse the findings contained within confidential attachment A. Those in favour of that vote were Councillor Stephen Russell, Councillor Jennifer Navard, Councillor Ken Manolis, myself, Mayor Greg Milner, Councillor Blake D'Souza and Councillor Nick Warland. Those against were Councillor Andre Brendera-Brandis and Councillor Mary Choi. And on item 15.1.3, the council voted in favour of the officer recommendation, which was that council endorse the findings contained within confidential attachment A. Those who voted in favour of the officer recommendation included Councillor Stephen Russell, Councillor Jennifer Navard, Councillor Ken Manolis, myself, Mayor Greg Milner, Councillor Blake D'Souza and Councillor Nick Warland. Those against were Councillor Andre Brendera-Brandis and Councillor Mary Choi. Okay, so that brings us to item 16, which is closure. Before I close the meeting, I'd like to thank everyone for their attendance and participation. I declare the meeting closed at 9:37 p.m. Thank you all and good night.